This video may contain spoilers up to version 4.1, including Archon quests, world quests, and of course the open world. Proceed with caution. In this video, I want to discuss and speculate about two intriguing topics concerning the story revealed to us until version 4.1. First, Childe's role in the story and the whale he has encountered twice now. Second, the original sin of the people of Fontaine and why they differ from humans from other regions of Teyvat. Though we will be discussing release material within the game, everything else is mostly speculation on my part and may differ from the final product. That being said, please make yourselves comfortable and let's begin. During Fontaine's Archon quests up to 4.1, a lot of mystery has been surrounding Childe's involvement in the story. Why was he in Fontaine in the first place? Why did he lose control of his elemental vision? Why was he in a terrible mood as of late? And why was he declared guilty by the Oratrice in the case of disappearing women, even though the real culprit had already been exposed?
Guilty.
Usually, I would first lay out a detailed case in front of you, building up to certain conclusions to be presented on top of a collection of evidence. But today, unconventionally, I want to begin by boldly presenting one main hypothesis up front. It may seem unsupported at first, but I believe once we revisit several moments of the story with this interpretation in mind, things will begin to make sense, and I will build my case from there. My proposal is that the gigantic whale that Childe saw in a dream when he fell into an unknown abyss years ago, and then again at the end of the 4.1 Archon quest, is, simply stated, an embodiment of the Primordial Sea. Whether an ancient deity responsible for its very creation, or the manifestation of its will, the whale can be interpreted as a representation of the Primordial Sea's essence. Of course, it's never that simple, and I promise we will expand these possibilities later in the video. Still, this first approximation should be sufficient to place on the board as a fitting puzzle piece connecting many other parts of the lore. Keeping this idea in mind, let's revisit some of the crucial moments of the story. At the age of 14, back when Childe still went by his original name, Ajax, he fell through a bottomless crack into an unknown abyss. Keep in mind that in the game, Childe is supposed to be around 21 years of age, which puts these events at about 7 years ago. This is where he would meet his master Skirk and learn most of his combat abilities. When he fell, he had a dream.
In my dream, I was in the deepest depths of the sea, and the boundless seabed was all around me. But in front of me appeared a whale that was so massive, I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Skirk said that Childe had awakened it, and that traces of it remained on him. In other words, 7 years ago, in some unexpected turn of fate that we are yet to fully understand, a young Ajax accidentally awakens an ancient dormant entity of the primordial waters. Since then, Childe unknowingly carried a unique connection to the primordial whale, and thus to the Primordial Sea. Deep beneath Fontaine, the awakened titan begins stirring. Slowly, its anger rises, and with it the waters it commands. At first, nothing can be seen or sensed on the surface, but then during the last few years, the water levels of Fontaine began to rise. Finally, within the last canonical year, the sluice that seals the Primordial Sea begins to register the rising seawater levels, as primordial water slowly filters out into the otherwise normal surrounding waters. Childe, through his unique connection, subconsciously feels the wrath of the whale affecting his own mood.
So what are you doing in Fontaine, Childe?
Well, I guess it's because I've been in a bad mood lately. Maybe I still have a lot to learn about myself. But recently, there seems to be some sort of restless power stirring inside of me. And I don't know why, but every now and then I feel like I'm in a terrible mood.
He feels the call towards the source, which brings him to Fontaine. This power, possibly linked to the abyss, or at least more ancient and primal than elemental power, renders Childe's vision useless for the time being. In the trial, Tartaglia faces the Oratrice's verdict on the case of the disappearing women. Though Tartaglia himself is innocent of this particular crime, the Oratrice senses the presence of the Primordial Sea on him and declares him guilty, as it was primordial seawater that dissolved the victims. In the fortress of Meripede, the proximity to the Primordial Sea makes the call that Childe perceives stronger than ever before, so he escapes into the pipes in search of a way to answer it. So, the whale as representative of the Primordial Sea seems to fit the story pretty neatly, I think. Even the silhouette of the whale appearing next to Freminet in the Overture teaser could be a representation of his exposure to primordial seawater during the latest Archon quest. We know that primordial seawater differs fundamentally from the waters we usually interact with in Teyvat. In fact, it seems likely that unlike hydro, primordial seawater is not elemental at all, as revealed by using elemental vision on the primordial water source found during our investigations for the trial. The coloring of the primordial sea and the circumstances of Childe's first encounter with the whale both suggest a link between the primordial sea and the abyss. But I don't believe that the primordial sea is abyssal in nature either. If it was, it would be dangerously toxic to almost every living being in Teyvat, not only for the people of Fontaine. But before we stray too much, let's turn our attention back to the whale, and in particular, the whale's wrath. By the way, if you enjoy videos such as these, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing, commenting, or liking. That being said, every view is appreciated. Thank you for being here. I believe the primordial whale is indeed angry in some way, and there are two main reasons for my assumption. One, I think Childe's unexplained bad mood is indicative of the whale's state of mind. And two, Neuvillette did call the calamity he halted
a tsunami of fury.
Now its wrath could be directed at one of two things I can think of, either against the entirety of Teyvat, given what the primordial one and/or the second usurper and/or Celestia have made of the place, or against Fontaine in particular. Given that the prophecy related to the primordial sea seems to indicate the potential calamity is one that would mainly affect Fontaine, I will be focusing on the second possibility. And this takes us inevitably to one of the largest mysteries of Fontaine, the so-called original sin of its people, and the fact that only Fontanians dissolve in primordial seawater. This last fact really stumped me for quite some time. If the human race was created by the primordial one, why would a subsection of the species living in a particular region of Teyvat differ from the rest in such a fundamental way? The first step towards an answer lies in the realization that this difference between the people of Fontaine and those of other regions is not just conceptual or abstract. Instead, their body compositions are actually measurably different. This important detail is hidden within René's investigation notes that we found in the desert even before the release of Fontaine.
The structure of the so-called sacred lotus is similar to the composition of mine and Jacob's bodies, yet it has almost no common properties with that of Mr. Carl.
This observation is even mentioned a second time on the enigmatic page number 4 from the Book of Revealing World questline. If you are familiar with the stories of the two generations of Marcescent Floret Institute orphans, you will know that these names are very important to Fontaine's history, but I won't be going into more detail about them than is strictly necessary here. For the purposes of this topic, it should be sufficient to know that Jacob and the note's author, René, were both adopted by Karl Ingold around the time of the catastrophe 500 years ago. They later went together into the desert on an expedition which René used, among other things, to investigate the technology of the fallen nation. When I first read this part of René's notes, I admit it made me think that René and Jacob were both oceanids. After all, the sacred lotus is the vessel where the consciousness of the previous Hydro-Archon slumbers. But by now, we know that all three of them were in fact human. What could account for this difference in composition between their bodies then? Only one thing. Unlike Jacob and René, Karl was not originally from Fontaine. Granted, this has not yet been officially confirmed, but I have rarely heard a name that screams Mondstadt louder than the name Karl Ingold, and I would be very surprised indeed if this inference turns out to be faulty. The next obvious question to ask, of course, is, why and how is it that the physical composition of the people of Fontaine differs from that of other humans? I cannot truthfully say that I have a fully fleshed out answer yet, but I do have very specific suspicions, and I will share those with you. In order to do that, we need to talk about Remuria. Remuria was an ancient civilization, dating back to times preceding the rule of the previous Hydro-Archon. It was created and ruled over by the god king Remus. Here's what you need to know about the god king and his empire. The civilization is clearly inspired by ancient Rome. Just like the Romans, warriors and musicians from Remuria called any tribes that had not yet been conquered barbarians. The god king intended to have his civilization be eternally prosperous. Art and music were important to the Remurians, and music seems to have been more than just artistic expression at the time. Throughout the descriptions regarding Remuria, musicians and warriors are often named side by side, as if part of the same army. Even the expansion of the kingdom itself is referred to as a symphony. Yet the god king too was faced with a prophecy announcing the destruction of the entire kingdom by raging waters. Searching for ways for his people to survive the prophesied flood, Remus tried to find a way for humans to transcend their physical form, and to do this, he combined primordial waters with an immortal stone, creating a golden ichor. He even intended to replace the entire Primordial Sea with this material. Remus did eventually succeed in separating souls from their bodies, and he created golems on which he implanted these soul-filled gems. But the separation caused unimaginable suffering to those who were subjected to it. During the 4.0 Archon quest, we learned that the souls of those who were dissolved by primordial water actually did remain in some form. These victims, in a way, did indeed transcend their physical form. I believe that in his quest to enable the people of his kingdom to break free from mortality, Remus and his so-called Golden Symphony found a way to modify the very nature of human bodies. Whether this was achieved by extended exposure to primordial water over the viaducts built by the Empire, or through some form of power transmitted through music, this change spread through the entire kingdom and would persist over generations. The God King named 4 Harmosts, his most trusted servants. 2 of them were friends, Boethius and Cassiodor. Boethius, a musician, became utterly convinced by the God King's cause, and even though his origins could be traced back to one of those barbarian tribes, he was relentless and merciless when it came to the expansion of the empire. Cassiodor, ironically a warrior, was more empathetic and more considerate of those they were conquering. 2 phrases, one from each of those 2 Harmosts to the God King, sound particularly suspicious to me regarding the possible change induced by the Golden Symphony on the people of Old Fontaine.
Only after the God King recognized me did I first witness the might of civilization and order. Let my flesh and bone then be utterly changed. Let my name and tribe be forsaken. The world shall know only the name Boethius.
It is as I feared, and it is as I mourned, my brother. While you sang on high, you should have heard the voices of the lowly also. Not all would willingly see their homes and nature stolen from them. Not all can accept our melody.
If my suspicions are correct, and the Golden Symphony caused a fundamental change in all who were reached by it, this very change could well be the original sin. Changing the very nature of mortal beings to allow them to break free from the shackles of their mortal body could easily be seen as a sin by any deity of ancient or recent times. And if this change is inherited by the following generations, then indeed everyone from that point forward is born in sin. This brings us back to Childe and his unique connection to the primordial whale. I will be so bold as to state the following prediction. Childe will play a crucial role when we confront this titan of the deep. Because of his unique connection with it, together with his unmatched skills in battle, Tartaglia will become the savior of Fontaine, even if the people won't know it. And this finally will give meaning to the words spoken by his master, Skirk.
She said that all my combat training would be useful in the future.
Finally, and before we wrap this up, let me venture a few guesses concerning the nature of the Primordial Sea, and by extension, the whale. Neither abyssal nor elemental, I believe the Primordial Sea may be where both abyssal and elemental beings first originated from. I could imagine a possible genesis story of the realms sounding something like this.
Before the establishment of the human realm by the Primordial One, only 2 realms existed. The Light Realm, home to the raw elements, dragons and vishaps, and the Void Realm, known as the Abyss. Even before that, only a boundless abyss with no beginning and no end covered the plane of existence. Then, the first origin arose in the form of a vast primordial sea. This primordial soup would spark the first beings into existence. Some of them would be aligned with the abyss and wander the darkness forever. Others would awaken elemental forces and establish a new realm of light.
I know that almost doesn't even deserve the name speculation anymore. But if the Primordial Sea could nurture both light and void-aligned creatures, then maybe, just maybe, the proximity to the Primordial Sea could partially explain the Arkhe system of Fontaine. I just find it hard to believe it a coincidence that the colors of the 2 opposing energies of the Arkhe system just so happen to be the same colors representing light and void. I find it even harder to believe it is a coincidence that the only 2 characters of the game that are from the Light Realm just so happen to be aligned to the light side of these forces. If you have made it this far, thank you kindly for joining me. Please share your ideas and theories in the comments, and may the stars continue to guide you. Until next time.